Alright. So, this looks like Cass Yoda aggro. I feel like the only thing I want to keep here is actually the hidden motive. Like, I don't mind keeping the rest of it, but I need to find a vehicle, and I want to find gas. Oh, sorry about that. I was talking to myself, and I hit the button. My bad. Why do they keep mulliganing? Hmm. So, I just realized it was Imperial Palace. So, he's definitely a mill deck. So, let's start off with this. So, the hidden motive I kept was actually just really bad. Alright, cool. So, if he eats my resource, I can eat all of his resources. So, I plan to play the Hailfire here, no matter what. Like, realistically, I would have loved to have the cube down, but it's not a huge dilemma. So, we lost the ATDP and a Houndstooth. So at this point, I will play the cube. Realistically, I should probably eat his resource, but the dilemma is that Yoda can get the resources back anyway, so if he's going to play a Force Meditation here, I'm just going to move on with my life. But I would like to get the special. So that's cool. So he's gonna flip those both to discard. Um, just get the 3 resources, just in case he has a hyperspace jump. Because like I'm really not concerned about, I think, roughly anything else. If he throws up 2 discard, then I just pitch the illusion to reroll and move on with life. Alright, so I'll play 4 for a natural pilot. This is why you don't let people draw. Because now he's just shitting bricks. So, let me think. I'm gonna do 2 damage here because I don't want to activate before. I'm hoping he claims and just fucks up. The reason I do that is because I don't think he'll put both on Cassian. He might have hyperspace jump here. I'd be okay with it. Reason I'd be okay because I get to go first. Ooh. So the interesting thing here is that like I should really use this disrupt, but I refuse to. He could have very well have an easy picking, which would bone me if I hit the 3 on the Hailfire. Alright, let's not be greedy. Let's eat the... We'll disrupt him. He might have a pacify, so like that might be a waste. We're at 22 cards. So if we burn through 8 already, we die round 4. Cool with me. There's not much I can gain from that. So we'll get the resource. And then we will 6. We'll 6 Yoda. The reason I'm 6ing Yoda is because if I play a vehicle, it'll be if I play a vehicle, it'll ping the 1 and I can still special off the Bazine. And I'm fine with my hand being pseudo dead because essentially he still has to pitch 24 cards from my deck. So we're in a real good spot. But if he had claimed earlier, then I would have definitely re-rolled Bazine and Snoke to see if I can get a kill out of there. Because if I hit the special and a 2 focus, then he would have died. Alright. So let's get Bazine out. That's a whole lot of discard. But he can't use most of it. So let us power action this for 3 resources. So we'll play this. For the ping. So here, let's play the second cube. So I don't plan to pay for both of these. I plan to roll out the other stuff first. But the reason for the cube is primarily that if he goes for the discard, I can bounce him so I can re-roll. Gets a resource, yep. I could have chosen to beguile, but I chose not to. So that one's real good here. We will eat his resources. The reason we do this is because we feel we can kill the Yoda. Like, forget Bazine special, who cares about it? He has 14 health. And we've got 18 cards. Disrupt. I just don't want him to cast Entangles or Beguiles. So what we're going to do is we're going to pay 1, put 1 cube back in hand. So I really just want 1 reroll. I think any more than that and I'm being greedy for no reason off of cubes because I still need them for generating resources. But that right there kind of gave me what I wanted, which is the disrupt for his other resource. He could easy pick here. Be a little sad, but whatevs. Alright, so we'll eat the resource. Alright. So we'll do this, and we will untap the Hailfire, because Hailfire is good. So that's 7. Yeah, no. Just killing him makes sense, right? Like, then he's just real far behind. Because I don't need to be greedy. And then we will put this cube over here. So his resource gen is pretty much gone. We could Beguile to take a quick peek He's really far behind. We've got 14 cards, so we have half of our deck, pretty much, plus 2 cubes. Alright. So, he only has that single discard. Let's go look at his hand. So he's got easy picking, Scruffy, and Into the Crosshairs. He needs money in order to play Into the Crosshairs, so I don't care about it. The reason I got rid of the Pacify is because he could stop the Bazine with it. So easy picking is the one I gotta, you know, quote unquote concern myself with. Where we dealt no damage to him, so that does 3. So we'll do 3 damage. Really just not concerned about him peeking at my hand. But why would I let him? So this can't show up as anything that's there, so let's just go with that. So we're fine with 2 damage. He has an easy picking left. Alright. Do the 2 damage so he can't easy pick. He should leave that there so he could easy pick. So if I hit double 1 focus, like, that's fine, just because I have the reroll for all the damage, and I only need 3 damage. Any side on Faust would do it. That actually ends the game right there. Alright, let's go see. Someone's at the... I'm gonna check to see if there's any Destiny stuff, but I told someone that if they responded within 3 minutes, I'd play them in Trilogy. So we'll see how that goes. Sad Butterfly Carla. Casual newer player. Did I play either one of those? No, it's that one. So just wait a second. So no one's still... We'll hit refresh to make sure the things are refreshed. Seeing if that person responds. It's been 2 minutes. We've got one more. Oh, man. So I actually don't want to play on the old map. It's kind of unfortunate. People don't know about the new one still. I don't know, man. I just don't want to... I don't want to play new players. I'm getting tired of it. I want to play good people. Um, Alright, so actually what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to play by myself. Not a full game. I'm just going to do round ones. Um, and the reason for this is because like you kind of need to know what you're looking at for a round. So I'll try to give you guys a breakdown and kind of assess it for myself as well. Like a lot of the time when I'm trying to do things for you guys, I end up making myself more aware of things, as opposed to just like it being like pure intuition. All right, let's load up the deck. Snoke, 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 Snoke. So if you're wondering why I went back to Dark Council, my theory was that um, the quad jumper was gonna be not amazing. It'd only be really good if you go Hailfires, and the reason I went for Hailfires is because I kind of wanted more bomb cards. So like, the reason I went a second natural pilot, even though it's really risky, is that when I cast it, I feel like I do a lot. Even if I'm just untapping the resource generation ones, maybe I do Hounds and I get a resource, and then I get 3 shields, so like my guy's safer. Dooku draws me a card, I can get more focus. And like we're paying really close to that value just for the die sides in general. And like what I mean by that is, so like, all right, so the mod part sucks, right? But so we're looking at, if we ignore the mod for a bit, like we do have to pair it, but if we ignore the mod for a second, we're looking at 2 damage, 3 damage, 2 focus, 2 shields, 2 disrupt. Now, this really has like a bunch of sides from a bunch of different of the items that we run. So the +2, you can think of it as being the same as, you know, the mod side on the ATDP. The +3, sure, same thing. But like as far as damage is concerned, as long as we hit it with the base, it's equivalent to focus firing with the 2 and a 3, which is what we have on a Fang Fighter. All right. Then 2 focus. That we pay that for Dooku already, and we're looking for that on Snoke. 2 shield. You know, where we do want shield sides occasionally when we're under fire. So, like, if I got the damage I needed via the untap, then the 2 shields there is perfectly fine. Like, so if I pay 4 for that, and let's say I get 2 damage from, like, an arc or a fang or something, and then 2 shields, like, I got 4 damage worth of value for 4 resources. So when I do it a second time, like, it kind of pays for itself. And what I mean by that is this. So if we go look at the cards, let me just go reset the board. All right. So let's go look at the deck real quick, because like there's technically a huge issue here. What the fuck is it? So now part of the huge issue kind of goes away because just overall the way of the deck works. So I'm gonna put out each of the cards. Well, yeah, I'll put those out too. I'm not gonna bother talking about the removal. So the overall expectation, right? And we'll go with resource gen first, which is literally pretty much just these two. The Dooku we do stuff with, but it is these two. So the cube essentially costs 1, and it has 4 blanks. Well, okay. If we count it as a 0, it's essentially 4 blanks, a 1, and a 2. But you can think of it as costing 1, and then we have 1, 2, 3, and it has cumulative upcut cost. So now, the thing here is that realistically, every time we roll it out, since we're paying 1, each of those sides is reduced by 1. So we actually have 4 blanks, plus 1, you know, 1 resource and 2 resources, when you kind of just think of it as a, what are you're gaining positives. So if you pay the 1 and then you get the 1, you're essentially floating it back, so you don't really gain anything. And floating 1 could be really bad, unless your opponent has, like, you know, triple disrupt, or like, you know, double disrupt and you have 2 resources, so then you pay 1, you're kind of out of that hairy situation. But the overall expectation is that you're going to probably need to focus this die to get +2 resources, or if you natural roll the 2 resource side, then you've got +1. Houndstooth is exactly the same if you really think about it, except you have the 2 cost up front. So the 2 resources for a resource is essentially equivalent to the cube when we, you know, get that 2 resource side. So you needed to have a resource already, and then you got +1. And then the 2 for 4 a little bit more stringent, but like you're getting 2 resources. So the overall expectation with both of these dice is that if you're gonna probably have to focus it to find 2 resources. If you can determine the number of resources you need, maybe you don't have to focus it, and you're fine with just getting 1 resource. Houndstooth, on the other hand, though, still has the disrupt, still has a single shield, and has 3 shields for a resource. So you actually have other sides that aren't just all dead. So like if you're feeling bad about Houndstooth, but you love Cube, you really kind of get to take this into consideration. Because the other thing is that this works with our battlefield, so you can make it cost 1, which would be the same as what Cube would cost you to get out, and then you never have to pay for it again. But you do have to monitor the number of resources you have just so you can generate the +1 and +2. But this is essentially 4 cubes in the deck. So the people that are like, oh, I love Cube, I wish I could have more cubes, but don't have 2 Houndstooths, are just like, what the fuck are you doing? All right. We're going to go over to Dark Council and Dooku now, just because they're not damage ones, and these are very similar. So now, the thing here was that, realistically, if you use Cube twice, and you had to pay 2 for Houndstooth, then in theory they ended up being like the same value, except now the Houndstooth actually just does more stuff over the course of the game. You have the Eat My Bazine, die to gain a resource, blah, blah, blah. So now if we go over to Cube and Dooku, so now Dooku's big thing is just that, okay, for 3 resources, which is the equivalent to 1 resource on a character die, the Snoke ability, and a damage, we're getting pretty much a super die, or a super Snoke die as far as like what we're looking for. We get 2 focus, we've got shield, 2 shield, 2 resources. Now, 2 focus, if you kind of think of it in the grand scheme of things, when you use stuff like concentrate, you're always paying 2 resources to fix 2 of your die. Alter, 2 resources to fix, to change 2 dice. Aim is 1 resource to fix your 1 die. Like there's a bunch of stuff over the course of the game that was kind of doing things like that. Like It's a Trap was a whole different ball game, and then we have them now, which requires you to have the battlefield, and you fix I think 4 of them. But for the most part, the theory here was that we're gonna pay 3, and we're probably gonna do the same thing we were doing with Cube and Houndstooth. We want to jam it round 1. We want to focus it to the 2 resource side, and we want to get that money to continue, our ramp with. So in that situation, like if you burn a focus to get the 2 resources, it's essentially like the Dooku cost a resource and 1 of your dice. And then in the future rounds, you're just like, all right, well that cost associated with it is really good, or like it's perfectly fine, or you're just like, because if this die hit costs 1, but it said you can't roll it in that round, imagine it was like Crafted, it just came into play tapped, you'd be like yes all over it. So then Dark Council is kind of like a mini Dooku Light. So it costs 1. We don't have to kind of make it pay for itself, but if we did via the resource side, then it did cost 0, and we have 2 sides for focus, and we have the special to draw a card and re-roll it, which is 50% to get back to resource or focus. And the more or less the theory here is that I wanted the additional focus sides. Like, how often do I find myself re-rolling Snoke, trying to find a focus to fix my other dice to the exact sides I want them? In these cases, cubes or Houndstooth to the 2 resource sides. So, like, with that designation, I could even find myself putting a second Dark Council in, so that I don't necessarily have to find the the focus sides on Snoke. Because if we go back and where's my bag? So if we go look at Snoke, right? If you kind of think of it like this. So a lot of the time, if we hit a single resource, a single focus, we'll go focus into 2 focus on Snoke, 2 focus to fix our dice. We try to re-roll a bit in between if we can, but it also depends on like if we're playing around removal or there's key situations. So now, if the Dark Council hits the 1, we could change the 1 into, change any of the Snoke dice into 2 focus, and then do that, or, daisy chain again and have 3 focus. So realistically, if this gets us to let up on having to go Snoke into Snoke focusing to fix stuff, then we've essentially paid 1 for a Snoke die, because we'll have that other die left over, provided we don't need a 3rd focus. Getting that die extra is kind of just like, well, that's really profitable, because I think you would pay 1 for this die all the time. We kind of already pay 1 for this die, and if you just look at Dark Council's die versus Snoke's die, like, sure, the special's gone, but you have the focus, you have a better focus, you have the resource side. Now you have 2 indirect and a disrupt. So, like, the theory behind that just kind of like, all right, well, this makes perfect sense. So, like, after talking about this, like, it makes sense where I may even put the second Dark Council in because of the way our resource generation goes. If we want to cube and then Dark Council, we'll have spent 2 resources to get 3 resources, so we'll still net +1 and still have the stuff. The dilemma is just like kind of what we're doing with our vehicles in the round. But in theory, if we start with 2 and we roll out and we Snoke a resource side, we're at 5. So we don't have any 5 cost cards, meaning we have, 1 resource left over. So like affording that 1 into a Dark Council could be a huge option. There's also some weird minor things where we're like, all right, well, we really want a Houndstooth to get +2 or Cube to get +2, but maybe we don't want to burn Snoke's like focuses right away. So that makes huge sense, as well as Dooku Sailor, blah blah blah. But just in general, 1 resource for a focus is kind of what you're looking for from an event card, so we can get the consistent from this. And then like let's say we cast this on a guy, we could always eventually overwrite into the Natty Pilot. I don't even know where the hell the Natty Pilot went. Is it on the board? Alright, it's not on the board. So let's go grab the Natty Pilot, because we got to talk about this as well. Alright. So I guess I should just make the copies of this so it's more easily understood. Alright, so on these ones we kind of determined if Houndstooth comes down for 2 and then it gets me 2 resources, it paid for itself that round. Each future round is just going to be, net positives that way. Chance Cube cost me 1. If it gets me 3, it got me +2, but each round I'm going to have to pay 1 for it. So at most, it's going to pretty much require a focus side and always get me +2. But in some situations, I'll just take the +1. Dark Council is going to be like essentially 1 for a focus. Dooku Sailor is going to be 3 for 2 focus, but we're going to hope to kind of get that resource side or some shields occasionally. Oh yeah, sorry. So back to cost. Dark Council does not have damage of any sort. So we're looking at the 1 resource plus 1 card equals 1 focus. Dooku Sailor costs 3. So equivalent to the focus sides wise, even though we're drawing a card, so it actually does not cost a card anymore. We're paying 3 for 2 focus, which is not good. If it's used once, it's technically a negative. Once we've used it the second time is when we profit. But the same theory applies to Dark Council. Once we use it the second time, it already got profit before its cost. Because if we focus one time, like, it's already paid for itself. If we grab the resource, it's already paid for itself. The special can turn back into those and do the thing, but it's successfully paid for itself. And like that's kind of where Houndstooth gets in. Like Houndstooth gets the 2, then it's paid for itself. But Dooku has to kind of get used twice to pay for itself. Now, the weird part here is that so the focus sides are essentially 2 value, 2 value. The shield side is actually it's actually a 0 resource value. The 2 shield sides 1 resource, and then you've got 2 resources. So 3 of the sides are net value of 2 resources, or like what you're getting there is essentially a 2 resource cost. So just keep that in mind when you're considering taking shields, that like it's not the value you're getting from it. So if you grab the 2 resources and you grab a 2 focus, you've netted a positive value of 1 based on like cost association. So like these things could be considered like your ramp engine, but Dark Council and Dooku is also considered like your consistency. And like Dark Council and Chance Cube are similar in that they don't do jack shit else besides their intent. Whereas Houndstooth and Dooku Sailor both have the shield sides to help set up defense. So round 1, you ramp out. Round 2, let's say your hand's not so rampy, maybe ramp a little for the next round, but then you can also throw up some shields. I much prefer to take 2 shields than 3 shields for a resource because, like I said, that 3 shields for a resource is kind of like playing a defensive stance, which is 1 cost for 2 shields. So like equivalently wise, like that single shield and the 3 shields for a resource are the same actual value. But since we're a ramp deck, if we're ramping a bunch, then in theory, like, obviously 2 health for a resource is going to be, and our die is going to be kind of like a jackpot at times. So now we get over to the damage, and like this is kind of where things become immense. So Now, we talked about all this, like this valuation and whatnot, blah, blah, blah. So now DH17 has commonly been one of the best ranged upgrades. It's come out in Awakening, so like since the dawn of time, at least to me. It's been forgotten about by most people. But so the thing here is, since we're a deck that has, focus, for one resource, we can often find ourselves getting the 2 damage from it. And I don't mean the 2 damage for a resource. I mean the +2. So the +2 we do have to pair with the base. We only have Foss to pair it with. So don't be like, oh my god, I got DH, I'm keeping it, because it's not good for every hand. It'll be good in hands where you kind of want to burst the guy down. And against any of the slower matchups, a lot of the time you're just actually looking to ramp to find the vehicles and hopefully like Natty Pilot or Hailfire. Or even like removal or something. But primarily you mulligan so that you can get the ramp. So DH Blaster Pistol, 1 resource cost. So you need to get 2 damage out of it to have it fulfill its value. So here's where the problem comes. When you get the 1 damage, you're going to have to do that twice to equal out. When you get the +2 damage, it immediately paid for itself and it's profit after that. The shield is worth 0 resources. Like, technically, because the card stays around, once you get 2 shields, it'll have been worth its value. But the same actually applies to that single damage. So the single damage and the shield are actually the same value. The two range for a resource is actually a negative value. Because we already associate, 1 resource plus a card for 2 damage. So, like, in theory, if you get a +2 1 round and then 2 for a resource, you didn't get any profit from it. It ended up being the same, but sometimes that 2 damage is worth that resource. Especially when we go look at the other cards. And this is kind of why DH Blaster Pistol is still there, even though people were like, well, you have all these vehicles, why even bother with the pistol, blah, blah, blah. But the big thing is that just when you're focusing, the 2 damage from it, when you keep hitting that 2, like, it's pure profit. You're getting massive amounts of value from it. So let's go compare this to like ATDP, okay? So 1, 2 for a resource +2. So we've got 2, +2, 3 for a resource. And I think they wrote this wrong because it should have been 2, 3 for a resource +2. But anyways, so it's going to cost you 2 more resources to play it. The special, if it's not useful against your opponent, this is actually the similar sided to the DH, except now for these additional 2 resources, we've gained +1 damage on the base side and +1 damage on the resource costed side, but we've gained nothing on the +2. So realistically, ATDP needs to do 6 damage for no additional resources to equal its cost, meaning you have to use it for 3 fucking rounds. If it used that resource cost, then you've only actually gained 1 damage from it. So you'd have to, if you did that, you'd have to do that, like, in theory 6 times to equate its actual resource cost. And that kind of makes ATDP suck donkey dick. Yeah, I know. Sure, maybe I'm funny with that. Maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm a repulsive. I don't know. Vulgar, blah, blah, blah. Don't care. But that's the overall dilemma with ATDP. And, like, I'm really upset with it by that. The only thing we have going is that because we're a whole crazy resource ramp deck, our resources don't equate to the soaring normal resources for normal decks. Because we have all these, +2s over here, and, like, we give up a focus for it, like, it's weird, interesting stuff, because, like, one thing I didn't explain is that when we have to focus into these, we essentially gave up a die worth of value. So if we focus into 2 additional resources, we've essentially only gained 1 resource from it, and we gave up the other die that was worth 1 resource. Because the focus, like we said, was worth 1 resource. So, like, we kind of just changed the focus into its initial, base value, but then only got 1 from, let's say, the Houndstooth or the cube. So, like, keep that in mind when you're finding, like, 2 resources for 1 resource, or the 2 resource side on cube, where, like, maybe that focus could be a better value somewhere else. Not always. Usually it's not. Usually it's better just get the resource, because the other shit we're playing is just, it's very necessary. So we'll go over to Arc. And now, Arc's really interesting here because it's similar again. So talking about value on these. So 2 damage is worth a resource, 2 damage is worth a resource, 3 damage for a resource is actually worth, I think, half of a resource. Shield is half of a resource, and then special is some weird-ass shit where we can't really equate that value because it depends on what you're killing. If you're killing, like, something crappy, then it doesn't matter. But if you're killing, like, an Annie's Pod, that's worth a resource because it's a resource plus each round it would have been. Because if you kill Annie's pod, it's like a 2 disrupt there, and a card from their hand. But the other thing is just primarily that stupid thing's not getting 2 discard from you every round, or 2 shields and a discard, which in general is immense value from that. Because 2 shields are worth a resource, and then they got a discard from you, and like discard doesn't have an actual cost associated with it. It does not fit in the spectrum because cards, we don't have a card that just straight discards. Like in theory, you have like Friends in Low Places, you have Scruffy, so like you could kind of say it costs 1, but it doesn't. I guess it costs 1 because of like what bounty postings. Each opponent discards a card, so like I guess you could say a discard's worth 1 value, but it doesn't really apply that way the same because your die is fucking expensive. But anyways, so our arc, we've got 2 range, 3 indirect, shield, and a resource. So now 3 resource costs. We're gonna need 6 damage from this. That's direct. 6 indirect can kind of apply. It's one of those weird things because like, so let's say you're targeting one guy down, 2 character deck. Targeting one guy down, you Bazine him. Now, when you take the 3 indirect, the 3 is going somewhere else. So it's still technically 3 full damage. The dilemma is it's 3 full damage later. If this is like your first damage, then they probably split it up at 2 and 1. So then essentially you technically got more value than the direct 2, but you didn't get to choose where it went. Maybe they'll throw the 3 on a guy, so then it's technically 3 direct, but not to your choice. Maybe you could just switch targets and kill that guy. There's a lot of freedom when it comes to indirect, so big indirect damage sides are really interesting like that. So like I would pretty much call that like 1 1/4 of a resource, I guess. But in theory, once there's only 1 dude left, like that 3 is 3 direct, man. Like you can't put it any other way. So it's kind of weird in that front. So like that's why I call it 1 1/4 instead of like 1, and it's not 1 1/2. That's kind of where I feel it's fine in the spectrum. So either way, you're pretty much gonna have to resolve this die on the top half, or actually 4 of those sides 3 times, in order to get its value out of it. So that's similar to the ATDP, except the ATDP only had 2 sides you could do it on, and the Starfighter has 4. So that's kind of why. That's another reason I really dislike the ATDP. But we're playing in a stupid format with Annie's Pod Racer, and eating the Annie's Pod Racer is a godsend. And sometimes eating stuff like Ralliate or Crate Speeders kind of just get you out of harm's way at times. T47, like if that special eats a T47 that hasn't done its damage yet, then it was essentially 2 shields and killing a card, which is just like blockbuster. So that's why the ATDP stay there as a 2 of, even though I hate them. We'll switch this over. We'll go to Fang. So Fang's a little similar. We're missing an entire side. So because we're missing a side, we more than likely have to focus onto this one. And like I really don't want to take the discard, but you'll take it sometimes. Like I said, the shield is poopy. But for the most part, you've got a resource and a half. So that the 3 on the Fang gets interesting there because when you hit the 3, then it's a resource and a half value, so you only have to resolve it twice to technically get its payment. So you'd be like, oh well, this is better than Arc, but the dilemma is that you have to probably focus to it. So since it's only 33%, if you reroll twice, which is pretty much our max expectation based on the number of cards we cast in a round, then you're looking at 70%. So 7 out of 10 times you're gonna get a 2 or a 3, and like that doesn't feel too bad, but it's like 87.5% to hit 2, 2, or 3 on Arc. So you're just with 1 reroll, you're at 75%, which is higher than with 2 rerolls on Fang. And to me, that's quite a dilemma. So like I in my mind, I think I just prefer Arc. There's some value to be had from the ambush. The reason I'm testing 1 and 1 is because the 3 on the Fang is actually just like monstrous. Because we have so much focus, we Bazine special for 3, and then if we 3 on the Fang, and then Snoke a 2 on from Foss, that's 10. 10's actually a key number right now. 10 kills Yoda, 10 kills Cassian, 7 kills Anakin. But let's say they had a shield or something, like you need 8 or 9 if they had 2 shields because you went with your battlefield. So like that 9's like, all right, 3 puts him at 1, 3 puts it at 4. And then a Faust on 1, 2, 3 like takes them off the table. What did I say? That 3, 1, 4. Yeah. So that's about right because we were saying 9 total with the shields. So like I still don't know which one to really go with. But that's at least the theory on these. So the dilemma is, once again, we have to use Fang Fighter like 2 or 3 fucking times. Whereas DH, we had to use it once. And that's why DH is amazing. And the damn vehicles, like, suck ass. Because, like, in theory, they should be higher. Like, I should be able to pretty much use the die twice and, like, have recouped my costs. But we don't. So, like, that's where part of the dilemma comes. Now, Slave 1. Slave 1's really interesting because we have that 2 range side again. We have a 2 indirect, and we have 3 indirect for a resource. So if we kind of go back to ATDP, it's a little similar to that, except now instead of direct damage, we have indirect, and indirect is worth less than direct. It's not worthless, but it's worth less because it's going to sub-targets. You start focusing some secondary guy, they're going to put this on their main guy, so like there's some mind games you can get in there sometimes. But, so the value goes to, oh crap, you know, we have to pretty much use this 3 times again. And then you have the resource side at least this time. So, like, in theory there, you can kind of recover the cost a bit. But do you really want to take a resource on your damn 3-drop vehicle? Not a single resource. I'd rather have 2 resources like the Dooku Sailor. So, like, that's the dilemma with this deck is, like, we're paying so much, but the value we're getting is not really high. You have to get a massive amount. So, like, think Planetary Bombardment. Costs 6. You have to resolve 7 for a resource more than twice to get the coverage back. But the dilemma is because it's a single card, like, the valuations change immensely. If you kind of think of it like, all right, well, Field Medic heals 2, but Mended heals 3, and it costs an extra resource. And it's like, well, if the card doesn't go away, then in theory you're kind of gaining something back because we don't know what the hell the value of an actual physical card is. We know when you do Ancient Wisdom, it costs you a resource, you draw 2, but you only get +1 from that. So, like, is a card worth half a resource? I think that's the quote-unquote theory there. Because it's like, take cover is a shield, and 2 shields is worth 1. 2 shields in a card is worth 1 resource, but 1 shield in a card is only worth nothing. So, like, it makes sense that could be half of a resource. Because the shield is half of a resource, and then the card is kind of half a resource. Maybe there's a quarter of a resource. I don't know. But, like, it's some weird expectations there. Because, like, maybe it's a third. So it might make sense that a card is worth a third of a resource. Yeah, because then it's like, all right, well, if a shield's worth a third, and you have 2 shields where that's two thirds plus a third for the card, you're at a full. And then that kind of makes sense at the point where you're looking at, like, Mended cost 2 for 3. Because you're getting half. No, because that sucks too. That's like, now you're paying like 1.66, so like it sucks. It overcosted. But anyways, so Slave 1 has a power action. Now the power action is really interesting because, like, you get the reroll. So, like, what's a reroll worth? A reroll is worth like a portion of a card. But if you successfully mitigate a die, then, like, that has a value. It may not be worth the full resource. If you take an important die, then it's worth a full resource. If you take a shitty die, or just any die you can take, then it's worth a little bit less than a resource, but it still fucks with your opponent. So, like, it's really hard to complain. You can kind of think of it as like a hidden motive at that point, like, or a doubt on some mediocre die that just went away. So, like, that has value. It has extreme value, and that's why we run it as a freaking 1 of, because the card is just really good, but it's a unique, and it's not so good that we run it as a 2 of. So, this goes back to, we'll probably have to use Slave 1 twice, and then Power Action twice to really get to its sufficient cost, which is technically still better than ATDP and Starfighter, but they all have different things going, because if Starfighter hits the 3 indirect twice, it's 6 indirect. 6 indirect is, you know, probably worth about that much. If you think of it team builder wise, 2 indirect was worth 3 team building points, but whatever. Like, we're supposed to be making tons of money, and we don't really have better options like crate speeders and stuff. So we take what we can get. These are still do higher damage than the crate speeder on the resource costed one, but sometimes we don't like it. But late game, throwing out 3s is amazing. So the reason we got Hailfire back was this. If after looking at these 2 fucking cards for a while and, like, kind of despising them because of the cost efficiency, that's how we ended up with Hailfire. So now Hailfire has matching sides roughly, but has a 4th one. Has no blanks. So, you know, we're looking at 2 ranged, that's worth a resource. 3 range for a resource, that's really only worth half a resource. 2 indirect, that's like 3/4 of a resource. 3 indirect, that's worth a little bit more than a resource. 2 disrupt, I think 2 disrupt somewhere probably around a resource and a half. But it kind of depends on what's going on for value, and then you got a shield that's poop. So in theory, if it's just the die, we have to use the die 4 times for a lot of the shit. But since we're getting an indirect when we cast it, and then when we cast subsequent vehicles, we're getting some of that value back immediately just by casting other vehicles. So if we kind of compare this to these, you know, this is 2 range, 2 indirect, 3 indirect for a resource. 2 range, 2 indirect, 3 indirect. We lose the focus thing, but we gain, you know, 3 range for a resource, and you get the poke. So like that 1 resource for the poking is well worth it. With this many vehicles, we've got 7 for damage, and then we've got another 4 over here. So we're at 11. They may not come out earlier, but essentially you have 2 hailfires and 7 vehicles you can cast. And the reason I'm saying 7, or I guess you can count 8 because the other hailfire, is because we have these 5, and they don't run into each other. And then we can only cast 1 Dooku and 1 Hounds. So at max, we can have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 vehicles out. So keep that in mind when you're looking at your stuff. You max out at 9 vehicles that you can put in play. So if you've got, you know, Arc and a Fang and a Hailfire already, you got to be like, all right, well, I can only play 4 of them. But anyways, wait, Arc, 1, 2, 3, you can play 5. Through 4, 6, 7, yeah, 9, okay. So like Hailfire's pinging kind of gets back to the cost. Once you ping twice, the cost was worth it. And overall, like because of the 4 damage sides, you're less likely to have to focus. You can kind of settle for whatever side came up. If you know you're rerolling twice and you hit like the 2 indirect, then maybe you reroll it a couple times. But if you don't have the resource to pay for it, then I probably don't get greedy there, because realistically, if you don't have the resource to pay, you can only hit the 2 ranged, the 3 indirect, or basically the 2 indirect again, which puts you at 75% chance to be at the same or better, but only 55% chance to be better. And then in theory, you still have 25% chance to whiff completely. But the 2 indirect is also very beneficial. So now this is where this motherfucker comes in. So now all the vehicles are relatively safe. They don't really die unless you're playing that stupid Sebulba fucking ATST deck, in which case you're going to have some issues. But now this is where Natural Pilot comes in, because now we had already assessed what the value of these cards are, or the sides are. Now, so modifieds in theory are always less than what the expectation is, but as long as you pair them together and you're not running into illusions or something, like you're pretty content overall with it. So I'm gonna treat them like their base sides, math-wise. So we've got +2, so that's a resource. +3, resource and a half. 2 focus, that's a 2 resource side. 2 disrupt, that's essentially another 2 resource side. 2 shields, that's another single resource side. So this fucker costs 4, and you're just like, well, those numbers don't matter. But once you start adding in one of these other dice again, the things change. Because if you do it off of a Hailfire, like we said, there were a bunch of 1s already on there, or like close to 1s. So essentially, since we already had 1, 1.5, 2, 2, 1, where it's like we're getting another full resource value of die. So it's really like it's 2, 2.5, 3, 3, 2. And now that pretty much means if you use Natural Pilot twice, it's done its job. And now the big thing here is that because the damn damage side is so large, if you pair it with another large damage side, so let's say you untap a Fang, you do it, and then you focus over to 6. 6 is huge. If the guy didn't already take damage, he's at half health at least. And if the guy took some damage already, probably dead. So that's the big thing where like the round Natural Pilot comes down, it can do monstrous amounts of damage. So as soon as you kill a guy and like a couple dice are gone, or a couple dice and an upgrade or something are gone, the value you got from there is just immense. Because like now let's say you killed a Yoda's 2 dice. Every time you had to 8 one of his dice, like his dice were worth like a resource and a half roughly. I think if one of them hit a special and the other one missed, and then it was worth 2.5 resources. Because you're going to get a resource from the first one and focus, and then you're going to get like a resource from the second one. Like technically on the focus there, you're like, well, I still got 2 value, but like it's the way you're daisy chaining. It's just like you ate both of them and you gained two resources and another effect. And the other effect, if it's a focus, is like I said, technically worth a resource. So that's 3 resources right there. So like if you end up killing a guy because you natty pilot in that one round, like natty pilot paid for itself. Whereas outside of DH, none of these fucking cards can. Like none of these cards here can pay for themselves the round they come down. Not a single one. Like if Hailfire hits for 1 and then you do the 3, that was technically worth 2 resources. So like that was the closest you were gonna get, because it does ping for itself right away. So if you ping for itself right away and you get the 3, then it was worth 2 resources, and like that was the closest you were gonna get. You play another vehicle, you do it again, it's fully paid off. The other vehicles take 2 rounds to pay off minimum, and usually 3. So that's kind of why I'm upset with them. But the theory here is that you're just supposed to generate so many resources that you can kind of counter afford the fact that this shit's costing you money. It's also why we start with 5 resources, and the fact that Snoke's just a fucking amazing. So Snoke's ability is really interesting, because like we talked about all this. All right, well, a resource is worth 2 damage. So when we deal one to like Bazine or Faust and we get 2 extra resources, we have blown that spectrum clear out of the water. Like in theory, if we wanted 2 free resources, we needed to take 4 damage. At least if an opponent was doing damage to us, you know. So like if the big thing there is like when you play stuff like logistics, you're like, all right, well, you need very specific requirements and 0 cost to get 1 resource. We're taking 1 damage and doing it. So like in theory, if we get a shield at some point, that was worth 2 resources. Like if you grab a shield on Houndstooth to put on a guy and then Snoke it off and get 2 resources, like in theory you traded this die for 2 resources. Or you could just do all the shit and get 4 resources and have taken a damage and gave up your die, which is just, like I said, amazing because of Snoke. So Snoke's really the guy that's carrying the entire deck, because that shit's ridiculous. Like if we had to do all this stuff regular and he didn't have the Snoke ability and just these die sides, we would not be playing this shit. It just would not be good enough, because this over here costs too much. We could play it on like a cheaper thing, because like if you use holdout twice on the +2s, it's like, all right, well, you know, it paid for itself. But like realistically, you'd like stuff to pay for itself the round it comes down, but that's not how this deck works. Ancient, when it gets a +3, the fact that it can heal 2 after, like Ancient really costs like 1, because if you heal with it, it field medicked. So paying 1 for that die, you do 1 damage twice, like that paid for itself. If you use a +3, it's already profited. And like those are big things. So like now it's weird, because like I've never sat there trying to assess it into character dice, but you've essentially got half a resource, a full resource, a blank, a resource. Bazine's dies are fucking interesting, because like the way they're set up, like a disrupt and a discard can be worth a resource, but they can also be worth nothing. Then you have the resource. In the first time you special and hit 3 damage, it's a resource and a half, and then later it's half a resource. So she's really interesting there. But we're starting with 5 dice, so if we get 2 full rounds of the 5 dice, like we're pretty content overall, because it shouldn't be hard to get, you know, essentially 10 resource worth of value of your dice. So just keep that in mind when you like use your focuses to get to a resource that doesn't get snoked. Like you gave up pretty much a resource to find a resource, and like there's a lot of like plus minus value when it comes to this stuff. So don't keep it too in mind, because you really have to get your stuff down to win the game. And then there's like, you know, how much damage you're doing versus how much your opponent has to spend to try to mitigate it, blah blah blah, and the value there. But I just kind of want to speak about that stuff so that you can kind of see how the cards match up against each other. And that's why I re-got rid of an Arc and a Fang to have the 2 Hailfires back, is just because the overall, what you were getting from them right away was about worth it. Like the Hailfires 2 was 2 in an indirect, so you know it's essentially a resource for the 2, and then like a third of a resource or half a resource for the 1 indirect. It's really hard to monitor indirect, but you have to kill those guys at some point anyways. So think of it as a future resource, or half a resource now, a quarter of a resource now and a quarter of a resource later. Those will come up. Like things get interchangeable and fuck up with Bazine sometimes, but she's the main target like all the time. So you really don't worry about her special too much. Pay attention to what your opponent's doing for shields and different stuff like that. Because if you've been hitting a main guy and one of their sub guy, their only sub guy has a shield, Hailfire, they're gonna ping the shield off. If they have 2 guys, stuff's a little little more difficult there. But that's more or less the breakdown here. So just kind of keep that in mind with what we're doing. And like it kind of supports the same for removal. Like Hadley is almost like it costs a resource. Like a lot of the time when we give up a die, I feel fucking terrible because like that die was worth about a resource. So this is the same as like playing like a pin down, except we have to have shit out first. Except once we're done re-rolling, like the value there was immense. But we're so slow. Like how often does that happen? Hidden motive is often like a 33 or a 50-50 to get that plus and not spend the resource. Like, the fact that we have 4 0 drops is great because we have so much expensive shit. We have 2 illusions and 2 pin downs. Illusion can be negative because we're milling cards at times, but for the most part, it can block 3s and 5s and stupid shit or catch people to switch targets, so it's hard to bitch. Beguile is really is not overcosted per se because the ability is really good. So we're removing 1 die, which is the 1 cost. So for one additional cost on the same card, we're getting reroll a die and then turn a die to any side. So like if your opponent's gone through a good chunk or we hit like a triple discard, Beguile becomes like blowout removal. I'm running 2 pretty much because there's so many focus decks and not all of them do action cheating. So if they're like focus all the stuff, and then you're just like, all right, Beguile, and you're just like, all right, reroll that die, fuck this die over here, and then this die, get away. But it's not necessarily the greatest. Sometimes single target die, removal is going to be better. But we make so much money, usually we're okay. But if we're often finding that we just don't have the money to cast Beguile, and we really want Beguile like near the end, then it's whatever, we move on. But this is really good at stopping nut rolls, and we don't have anything else that affects 2 dice. Friends in low places is just to kind of clear the way so that we can make sure we ramp or get our damage in. But that's more or less the gist of the deck. Make money, make damage, stop damage. And there's nothing else really to go with. But I hope this was very helpful to people. And, potentially you can apply some of this stuff to other decks. But, because things like Ancient and Shoto are ridiculous. Like, completely and utterly ridiculous. The only reason they're not really, super played right now is because, the lineups are in a fucking mess of shit. Because, these lineups have... So, this lineup has 26 health, and you have broken-ass Snoke. But if we could... If you do, a melee lineup, you could probably... You actually 100% could do a melee lineup with Snoke. With, Ancients and Shotos and different shit like that, and just get massive value off of it. It's just that your damage output is always, a little constrained. Because, when you pay 2 for an Ancient, a lot of time you're just getting 1 damage from it. So even though the overall value is going to be more profit than it was worth, it's not all at once. It's not quick enough sometimes. And then Shoto, 1 + 1 + 2. So the 1 is half a resource. The +1 half a resource. Less than half a resource. The +2 is worth a resource shield and then a resource. But once it starts generating the shields, it's auto getting half a resource every time you activate. So that's kind of why it's just big, because if you did 1 damage, you did 1 damage, and then that was 1 resource. If you nab 2 shields with it, then you've already paid for itself, and now every time it does it after, you're just pure profit. But it 2 rounds to do it, and that's with grabbing the shield. If you hit the +2, you're all right, whatever. But that's the thing. Those dice are just relatively small. These dice are big. So even though it's oh, we need 3 rounds to pay back for an arc, because of the way we're generating resources, Snoke with 1 of these dice, we're at 5 resources. Okay, let me play a Houndstooth. I'm at 3. Let me get 2 resources off it, back to 5. Play a DH in one of these things, or play a Inhale Fire, or a piece of removal, or pay cost, whatever. And we're all right, we'll Bazine you for 3, hit you for 2, and I've got 5 resources worth of shit. A lot of time, going Hounds into Dooku into one of these vehicles, you're you feel like you're way ahead. You're not super ahead, because they kind of daisy chained off of each other, but they start paying for each other immediately. Because Houndstooth, after it gets +2, it's done paying for itself. It's pure profit. Dooku Sailor, after gets a 2 resource, any pretty much resolving whatever minus the single shield, and it'll either have finished paying for itself or be profit. So it bounces around as far as what shit's going and costing, but it's very, very efficient and tends to be very consistent. But yeah, so the natural pilot, we only have 2, 4, 6, 7 offensive vehicles we can untap, but we can always untap a Dooku Sailor and regenerate more money, or shields or whatever, and be pretty content with it. So that's the big reason behind natural pilot and continue with it. Jetpack, Jetpack's an interesting one because of the cost associated with it. Like, it's really like a bunch of one sides on it, one resource cost sides. But like the mod sides are really tough and they cost 2 and fuck that. But fucking Yodas. But like it's all about, I don't know. As people die, shit's okay. If Snoke dies beginning of round 2 before you got to do stuff, you're probably gonna have an issue. If you got like the 3 of these down, you might be okay. But that's kind of why I was thinking like, all right, well, Dark Council's really good. It really depends on who people are focusing. If people are focusing down Bazine, then you're fine with what you have. You could just eat off of Foss pretty much and be good to go. Bazine just you lose the discard, you lost 3 damage. But like you're if Snoke's your last guy every time, you're pretty content. You'll have busted through damage and then you can just start shielding him up. You just got to make sure that you start playing that way and you don't just like go gung ho trying to get kills and like pitching all your removal. But that's the end of this video. You guys have a good one. Let me know what you think and whatnot. And yeah, make sure you watch it. But you'll never know that because you already did. All right, bye.